Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar on the topic of safe and sound starts with a plan. I'm pleased to have joining me today and presenting the webinar two extremely gifted and talented and knowledgeable colleagues, Bart Christofek, who is with Skyjack, and James Roudwin, who is with Sunbelt Rentals. And together, we're going to talk about this initiative that is started this week with this OSHA Safe and Sound program. Safe and Sound is an opportunity to energize existing safety and health programs, to launch new initiatives, and to celebrate those who have plans in place today with their achievements or milestones. This is an annual program that OSHA has had in place for several years, one that we encourage everyone to really embrace and become a participant in. This year's theme emphasizes on workplace safety as a team effort. Using a sports analogy, it's how successful teams rely upon preparation, communication, and execution, the same way that a safe workplace depends upon everyone following the same playbook and working together to prevent injuries and illness. That really is the theme of what we're going to be presenting today. Worker participation is engaging workers at all levels in establishing, implementing, evaluating, and improving safety and health in the workplace so that the workers themselves can understand that they're a valuable partner in making the workplace safer, and they're encouraged to communicate with management hazards that they see on the job sites. As I said, this is an annual year-round campaign. We encourage every workplace to develop and maintain a strong safety and health program. It's a journey, not a one-time event, for continuous improvement. Finding and fixing hazards in the workplace is an ongoing process that helps better identify and control sources of potential injuries and illness. So your panelists will present information to really complement the following objectives. Again, talk about OSHA's three pillars for safe and sound, the principles behind an effective safety and health program. Because we are going to focus in on mobile elevated work platforms, we're going to discuss how the ANSI A92.22 supports those pillars, where the why becomes how for MEWPs, and what makes an effective MEWP safe use program, the elements that turn your policies into daily practices, and last but not least, practical actions that employers can take immediately. So by the end of this, we hope that we're going to provide you with information that you can implement these the next day. So as you can see here, we too often see unsafe actions out in the field that in this particular case didn't result in an accident. So the fact that you have a sign that's out in front of a job site that says we haven't had accidents in X amount of days, these are examples of situations that occur that while an accident may not take place, we definitely don't necessarily perceive these to be safe operations. And one of the themes that I've been trying to echo this year is practice makes. And the typical response to that is going to be perfect, but in this particular case, it makes them permanent. So if you keep doing these things and we don't have a ways to amend these things that you're seeing here, we end up making permanent poor practices. And what we're trying to do is find a program that kind of addresses how we can change these things and make these go away. So when you're looking at the difference between feeling safe and being safe, again, those pictures kind of resonate that issue. Is none of those people out there thought that they were putting themselves in harm's way of not being able to go home at night. So again, feeling is confidence built on habit and past outcomes. So again, practice makes permanent. So if the habits that we're building on are inappropriate, we're going to get to the point where some of the outcomes we're going to have are not the outcomes that we want. So being is verifying, so the proof is in the pudding. What are we doing in our programs to ensure these things? And the gap is that no incidents today doesn't prove that the work was safe. So as we're moving forward, one of the things that I really kind of try to articulate here is that there's a program versus a plan versus a system. And while I'm not going to read everything that's within these slides, you can see that a safety program is dominantly something that gets into the requirements, policies, procedures, training requirements. The safe use plan is how do we apply that? What you do in the risk assessments, selection of equipment, identifying control hazards, and then we get into safety management system and saying, all right, I have these two things in place, and how do I manage for improvement? How do I recognize that those pictures that are up there are taking place? How do we prevent those from occurring? And when you're looking at it, examples of it, a safety program is an operator must be trained on the equipment inspected, fall protection used as required. The safe use plan is for this project, we'll use a 60-foot boom lift. Overhead power lines require XYZ controls. Here's the rescue procedures that we need to have in place. And these operators are the ones who have been trained, qualified, and authorized to do the work. And the safety management system will verify, audit all of these things to ensure that all these things are taking place. And if errors are found or false in the process, we then identify those and come up with ways of moving forward and proceeding with it. So as we're looking at those elements that are in place, here's the challenge. Why do experienced companies still experience MEWP incidents? So you should be asking these questions to yourself as you're moving along. And again, we're going to have some Q&A at the end. And hopefully these are going to get you to ask some of these questions along the way. Is compliance enough? And what separates a good companies from great companies? So as we're looking at it, I'm going to go over and just say, why do experienced companies still experience MEWP incidents? Because experience alone doesn't eliminate risk. Most incidents result from failures in safety management systems rather than a lack of the operator's skills. Is compliance enough? The short answer is no. Compliance establishes minimum acceptable levels of safety. It's not the highest level of safety. So compliance won't get you there. And what separates a good company from a great company? The difference is not policies. It's how safety decisions are made every day. Good companies react. Great companies anticipate. Good companies investigate accidents. Great companies investigate near misses. Good companies fix problems, and great companies improve systems. So think about those in how we're thinking about the programs that we have in place. So here we're talking about the ANSI A92 safe use standard, and OSHA gives us the why. Here's the requirements, and the A92 standard gives us how. So we end up having this safe and sound program, which are the principles about an effective process. But the ANSI standards start giving us how we can take that and put it into play. So you end up having risk assessments that need to be performed. Make sure that we have qualified operators. Ensure that we have qualified supervisors. Make sure that when we identify a hazard, we have safe work procedures to mitigate or eliminate those. And last but not least is when we put all those in place and we go when the rubber hits the road, what's the evaluation and that we can put in place to ensure that all these things are being done and coming out with the right results. And then if we have any gaps, coming up with areas of improvement. So as we move forward and we look at the safe use program, we end up having these three core silos that are in place. And I use the term silo cautiously because we end up having management leadership, which is necessary. We have worker participation, which is necessary. And then collectively, we need to find and fix hazards. So if we have management leadership, which is the commitment of resources, accountability, and expectations in place, but we don't have worker participation, their involvement, their voice, their ownership at the point of work, we're not going to get to where we need to go. And then collectively, when we go over there and we have this, I'm going to say, theory of how we're going to make sure that we have a healthy and safe work environment, we need to have a systemic approach to identifying, assessing, and controlling those on an ongoing basis. And while I said there's silos, they are not independent activities. They all must work together.
Hey, Tony, can you hear me okay?
I can. So now I'm going to move over to Red for him to move with this section. Thank you, Red.
I appreciate that. So I'm going to cover the management leadership and the worker section. So let's start off with leadership. Leadership's not demonstrated only by approving the safety policy. The workers determine what the organization truly values by watching what our leaders constantly say, what they do, what they fund, what they measure, and what they reinforce. Let's take a look at 4 practical ways leadership shapes our safety culture. So I'm going to go over 4 pillar areas. And the first one we want to cover is the commitment. Commitment becomes visible when safety decisions compete with production, our schedules, customer demands, and the cost. Workers notice whether our leaders consistently support safe decisions or make expectations when the work becomes urgent. A written policy communicates intent, but leadership behavior communicates the real priority. Leaders demonstrate commitment when they participate in the planning and ask meaningful safety questions. They support the stop work decision and follow the same requirements that's expected of the workers. But one inconsistent leadership decision can undermine several well-written procedures. Things to ask yourself: what do workers see my leaders doing that demonstrates safety is genuinely important? What safety and production appear to conflict with each other, and which one actually wins? Would an employee feel supported for stopping MEWP work because conditions change? The key takeaway for this piece is commitment is not what leaderships say when conditions are ideal. Commitment is what leaderships demonstrate when doing the safe thing becomes inconvenient. Next, resources. A safe use plan cannot succeed if workers are not given the time, the equipment, the information, the training, and the personnel that they need to follow it. Resources include more than just financial support. It includes the planning time, qualified supervision, access to manufacturer information, the correct MEWP, rescue capability, and the authority to delay the work. Selecting the equipment that is immediately available on the project or the job is not necessarily the same as selecting the equipment that's appropriate for the task in the site. When workers are expected to complete work and pre-use inspections while under unrealistic time pressures, the organization may unintentionally turn those activities into just paperwork, check the box situations or exercises. Some things to ask yourself: do workers have enough time to properly inspect the MEWP and assess the work area before beginning? Is the correct equipment available, or are the employees expected to make the available equipment work? Have we provided the resources for a realistic rescue, not just a rescue paragraph in a plan? And finally, what safety requirements is your organization is most likely to be skipped because of insufficient time or resources? Key takeaway: If leadership expects safe performance, leadership must provide the conditions that make safe performance possible. Our third one, accountability. Accountability begins with clearly identifying who owns each part of the safe use plan. Management, our supervisors, the operators, occupants, and even maintenance personnel and others affected by the work may each have responsibilities in this, but these responsibilities need to be clearly assigned and understood. Accountability should not begin only after something goes wrong. It should include verifying readiness before work starts and monitoring the performance while work is underway. Effective accountability focuses on both the individual actions as well as the system conditions. If a procedure is not followed, leadership should also ask whether the procedure was practical, if it was understood, or if it's supported and supervised. And accountability should be consistent across all roles. Expectations lose credibility if they apply only to the operators or the workers, not the supervisors or managers. Few questions to ask yourself on this one. Who owns the safe use plan for the specific MEWP operation? Who confirms that the risk assessment is completed and current? Who verifies the selection of the MEWP is appropriate for the task and condition? And finally, who has responsibility for communicating the changes to the crew? Key takeaway, accountability is not about finding someone to blame. It's about making ownership clear before the work begins and verifying that each responsibility is carried out. Our final and fourth piece is expectations. Employees cannot consistently meet expectations that are vague, assumed, or communicated only during training. Expectations should explain what acceptable work looks like, when work must stop, who must be notified, and what must happen before the work resumes. Leaders should confirm everyone understands a procedure rather than just distributing it and assuming that it has been understood. Expectations must be reinforced through field observation, our coaching, our toolbox talks, and routine conversations. And leadership should also consider whether informal expectations conflict with the written ones. For example, a policy may say stop when conditions have changed, while the work culture rewards finishing the job without delay. Questions to ask on this piece. Could an operator clearly explain when they are expected to stop work? Do employees know what changes require the risk assessment or safe use plan to be reviewed and updated? Are expectations communicated in a way that everyone involved can understand? And how is that understanding verified? What unofficial expectations might be competing with the organization's written safety expectations? And finally, are safe decisions recognized and reinforced or noticed only when something goes wrong? Key takeaway on expectations is they're not fully established until it has been clearly communicated, understood, observed, and consistently reinforced. These four levers work together. Commitment without resources become just slogans. Resources without accountability may not be used effectively, and accountability without clear expectations creates confusion. When leadership aligns all four and the safe use plan becomes more than a document, it becomes the way the work is actually planned, supervised, and performed. Now, to help us with this, ANSI A92.22 outlines 6 things that managers are responsible for establishing that live above the operator. It's a well-written and current safe use plan that is owned by the manager. A site risk assessment carried out by the supervisor before our people or machines arrive on the project. Tony, did you change me? Sorry.
I did
And
not.
the right equipment selected includes MEWP and other tools required to complete the task safely and effectively. An example is we've got an indoor only scissor lift that's on the project for one task, that cannot be used for an outdoor task, or that same scissor lift being used for another indoor task that requires the operator to get up and above an existing ductwork and the unit can't reach the task zone. Next, a documented rescue plan that is practiced and is task specific. A rescue plan is not cookie cutter. Not all job sites and not all tasks are the same. It can also change based on the equipment and size. Next, a compliance supervisor, operator, and occupant training must be completed. And finally, qualified supervisors are needed to oversee the work. Again, these are not operator responsibilities. These are leadership's responsibilities. Now let's take a look at our next slide and the safe use plan. Now this one, the safe use plan, your company's safety management system for MEWPs. It's one plan, 6 steps, and it's always in motion. It's not just a paper exercise. It becomes what you and your people do because they understand it and they believe in it. A question to ask yourself: what part of your safe use plan is documented? And what part only exists in people's heads? Now, with that question, I want to transition to our next important piece of the puzzle, and that's our worker participation. The people closest to the task are often the first people to see the hazards, the change in conditions, the shortcuts that are done or the workarounds, and any warning signs. If these workers are not actively participating, we lose our most effective risk assessment tool. Let's take a look at 4 actions the workers are instrumental in. The first one is identifying the hazards. When we conduct a risk assessment, we're making the best decision we can make with the information available to us at that moment or in that time frame. But none of us can predict the future or everything. The operator who is positioned in that boom lift or scissor lift often sees the things that we as management or supervisors never see. They see the soft ground. They see the drain cover that wasn't identified, that delivery truck that created traffic issues. They see the hanging obstacles, change in work sequence due to other contractors. These things that are not existent when we're doing the prior planning process. Ask yourself how many hazards you've discovered on a job site that you did not identify during that original walkthrough. Those workers that are participating are very important because they are the ones doing the work and recognize those things. Next is this stop unsafe work. This next one is the most important bullet on the slide, in my opinion. Many organizations say workers have stop work authority, but the real question is, do workers believe they have stop work authority? This is a huge difference. If an operator identifies a hazard and knows that it was critical, it's going to critically delay production, they may keep working. If they believe leadership will support them, they're much more likely to stop and reassess. If an operator stopped your project today because they believed conditions had become unsafe, what would happen? Would they be thanked or would they be challenged? The answer to that question often reveals the true safety culture of an organization. And the OSHA Safe and Sound campaign emphasizes worker involvement because hazards are often prevented when workers feel comfortable speaking up rather than simply following instructions. Next is reporting challenging conditions. The problem with risk assessment is that job sites are dynamic. What we saw at 8 a.m. this morning is not going to exist at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Ground conditions change, the weather, traffic, pedestrian activity, other contractors arriving, materials delivered, and equipment getting relocated. A safe use plan should never be viewed as a static document. It must evolve as the conditions evolve. Think about the last incident or near miss your organization experienced. How many of those events involved conditions that changed after a plan or process was completed? Most incidents can be tracked back to changing conditions that were either not recognized or not communicated. And our last one on this, the fourth one, is participating in planning. The best plans are not written for workers, they are written with workers. They bring that practical field experience that management may not ever know. They know how the task is performed, what shortcuts people commonly take, the bottlenecks that occur, challenges that previous crews had encountered, and what rescue obstacles may exist. When workers help develop the plan, they become invested in it. They become invested in the outcome. And which plans are workers more likely to follow? The one that's just handed to them or the plan that they helped create? Now, the answer is obvious. People support what they build. This is why worker participation is not separate from planning. Worker participation improves our planning. Now, in closing on this slide, look at all four of these together. A worker identifies the hazard, they stop the work, they report the changes, conditions, and they participate in improving the plan. That's exactly what OSHA Safe and Sound campaign is trying to achieve. Not workers who simply follow instructions, but workers who actively contribute to the safety. The safest organizations are not the ones with the most procedures. They're the organizations where every employee feels responsible for the outcome and has the confidence to speak up for something that does not look right. Safety happens at the point of work. The closer you get your workers involved in that process, the stronger your safe use plan begins. Now, to do these four actions, we need qualified people to make better decisions. And ANSI A92.22 requirements outline four areas of competency. The first one we briefly talked about earlier is the operator training. It includes the classroom or online theory and the in-person hands-on practical training and evaluation. Now, this training is based on the group and type of MEWP the operator is going to be operating. For example, a scissor lift 3A is not transferred over to a boom lift 3B. After training comes familiarization, and it's machine specific. It includes the controls, functions, features, also includes limitations and safety items specific to that machine that may be different than the unit that they were trained on. And familiarization is before use and must include sufficient time for the operator to achieve proficiency. Now, for the people directing the MEWP operation and work, supervisor training is essential. That training includes proper MEWP selection for the task, the rules, regulations, standards that are applicable to the MEWP safe use, the training, familiarization, and the work that's being performed. It also identifies potential hazards associated with the MEWP use and how to protect against it. Also includes the knowledge that the manufacturer's operators manuals are part of the MEWP, an integral part, and must be stored on the unit. Now, let's not forget about those that are helping our operator, the occupant, we call them. Occupant knowledge is vital. It's the instruction from the operator to anyone other than them on the MEWP, and it's the basic level of knowledge to work safely on the MEWP. At least one of those occupants must be provided with the knowledge to operate the controls in an emergency when that operator is not able to. Now, this doesn't give them authorization to operate the controls at any other time other than in that emergency. Now, in closing out this one, a certificate proves somebody attended the training. Competency demonstrates every day through decisions they make. ANSI A92 is not about producing certificates. It's about developing qualified people who can recognize hazards, adapt to changing conditions, and make safe decisions when it matters most. As you think about your organization, ask yourself this: are we measuring successful training completions, or are we developing competent people? Those are not always the same thing. On this and previous slides, we talked about qualified operators, supervisors, and occupants, but competency is only valuable when we use it. And one of the biggest mistakes organizations make is treating risk assessment as something completed by a supervisor, safety manager, or project planner, and they hand it down to the crew. Now, ANSI A92 and the OSHA participation concept pushes us to think differently. The people performing the work should be active participants in assessing the process, not just recipients. We've already covered the job hazards that they're involved in, the environmental conditions and site changes, but let's take a look at the last two that we really didn't drill down into. And that's rescue challenges, the first one. Workers often identify practical rescue limitations, um, and these are frequently overlooked. A rescue plan can appear complete in the office, but when workers, usually the people that are identifying it, they're the practical users of it. They know how difficult the site is to access, whether another MEWP can reach that location, how congestion affects that emergency response, and what obstacles may complicate that rescue. Think of your organization. Have you tested your rescue plan, or have you only documented it? There's a significant difference. Workers frequently identify rescue challenges that management and planners never consider. The last one on this slide, lessons learned. Experience is one of the biggest and greatest resources. The final thing workers bring is experience. They know what has worked before. They know what almost caused an incident. They know what shortcuts are commonly happening, and they know where previous plans have fell short. One of the best resources of hazard identification is near miss that didn't result in an injury. If we capture those lessons and bring them into future planning, the organization becomes stronger. If we ignore them, we're likely to repeat them. This ties directly to OSHA's safe and sound philosophy of continuous improvement and learning from work before an incident occurs. Now look at these five together. Workers bring job knowledge, bring awareness to the environment conditions, they identify site changes, validate the rescue plans, and they contribute lessons learned. None of these things can be fully captured from an office or a conference room. A risk assessment isn't strongest when it's written by safety professionals alone. It's strongest when we combine leadership, technical experience, and the experience of the people doing the work. If we remove the worker from the risk assessment process, are we really assessing the risk, or are we just making assumptions about it? That is why worker participation is not simply a safety initiative. It's a critical component of an effective safe use plan. Now, finally, my last slide, I want to talk about the progression on this slide. How it progresses to a strong safety culture. We start with compliance because we have to follow the rules. We move to participation when workers become involved in the process. That grows into ownership and where employees begin making responsibility and overcoming those hazards, not just the tasks. And ultimately, culture is reached when safe decisions become the normal way we get work done, even when nobody's watching. As things, are said, people protect what they help create. And we all want to shoot for a safety culture, not just compliance.
Okay. Thank you very much, Red. Thank you, Tony, for the introduction earlier. Red, excellent summary of the two responsibility categories. Thank you very much for that. And thank you to everyone who's joining us today. We really appreciate your participation. Yes, good segue into the third element today, which is finding and fixing hazards. Now that we've clearly defined who the categories are and what their main responsibilities are. So when you're finding and fixing hazards, we're going to kind of dive into today to the risk assessment process and the planning process. And we're going to talk about how it's typically treated as a very linear process, but in fact, it's not linear at all. It should be continuous, and it really requires a continuous mindset. So when you look at the risk assessment process, it really is all about hazard recognition. And ANSI A92.22 has a clearly defined process that we want to look at. It's involving a repeatable workflow, And again, much like the theme of what Red was talking about, this is not a paperwork or like a checklist or, tick the box kind of thing. It's all very important steps. And where we see this isn't very new information, where we see kind of failure in this stuff is that people do in fact skip some of these steps. So the things that are common in all types of risk assessment are defining the task, identifying the hazards, and then assessing the risk. In MEWP specific activities, we have to find a place for selection of the MEWP to exist. And so we want to clearly kind of insert it here. Once you've identified and defined what's going on, and assess the level of risk, now is a really good time to slide in the selection of the MEWP. A very common mistake people make is they either already have equipment on their site or they rush out and they go and rent whatever's available right away. And then they try to adapt the MEWP that they have to the task, which is clearly wrong. And a lot of safety professionals know this. A lot of supervisors are aware of this. Workers clearly identify this when talking to workers. They identify it for you right away. They'll tell you, "Oh no, it's not the machine for the job, but that's the one I've been given." And so then there's this kind of defeated attitude that that's what I have to use. So it's really important, as Red described the responsibilities on the planning side, the management, the supervisors, and anyone in a leadership position, anyone in the safety field who might be involved, is to really drive this point home. Is let's begin the planning phase early and let's identify what may happen and what factors exist in that specific task to then be able to find out what type of equipment we really want. The right classification is important. We want to make sure that the correct size of equipment is there. All the different types of models and makes that are out there for scissor lifts and boom lifts, spider lifts, all these tracked machines that are available, things that have outriggers. There's just an unlimited supply of different types of equipment out there, and somebody has to be qualified on staff on site. And if not one individual, certainly the collective has the ability to be able to look at all of the factors and put their input into, say, what machine they believe would be the best for limiting or hopefully eliminating a lot of these hazards and risks. Once we do all that and we've identified what's available out there and what we're trying to prevent, we can begin to implement the controls. It's easy to say that falls are our biggest fear, so we're going to just give you a harness and a lanyard to every worker, and everything should be fine. If you notice on the hierarchy of controls, PPE is last for a reason. That's the last thing we say. Good luck. You might fall out there. We're not able to really control it, so wear this, and you should be fine. But anyone who's working in this field or knows anybody who has been involved in a fall with fall protection equipment knows that this is not a fun day at the office. You are still going to be potentially severely injured and you still require rescue. So that doesn't eliminate or even mitigate many of the risks involved. So we need to work our way up the hierarchy towards more of an elimination mindset and substituting or engineering different solutions in order to help reduce some of those risks. Rescue planning is another one of these elements that are definitely forgotten in my experience dealing with customers, going to sites, looking at actual construction projects. Always the general question of what's your rescue plan? And that blank stare, that look around, like everyone thinking, well, we have a plan, right? And it's more of a question than a response, right? It's kind of assumed that we'll know what to do when it's time to do it. And that's a really, really dangerous assumption. And anyone who has been involved in an incident that required prompt rescue knows how quickly the scenario can turn into a very big panicked situation if the correct planning is not in place, as well as not just planning, but deployment and practice and continuous review. So that everybody is prepared and ready to deploy their part of the plan as quickly as possible. And where would we be without communication? This is another one of those elements that are always assumed. So don't assume. It's always good to do your communication preliminarily, and then again, follow up often and document it. Document. So anyone who's involved, from operators to occupants in the platform who aren't operating but do have a role in the event of an emergency, certainly supervisors, and anyone that they appoint for specific tasks, everyone involved, even people who aren't involved in the specific task, even people who will never be on the MEWP, but they're in the vicinity of the MEWPs. You want to get everyone together, and you want to make sure that they all understand the plan and that they all understand the hazards and risks applicable to them specifically and how they can help to mitigate all of those. So the entire crew needs to get in on it and needs to be involved in getting the information. Hazard recognition. So let's look at some of the common MEWP hazards that exist. We generate these kind of hazard conditions from incident reports. Unfortunately, it is the best place to get information on what can happen is looking at what has already happened historically. So IPAF does provide a very comprehensive incident report every year. And we as trainers, we as supervisors, we as operators, we as managers, users, we can use this information and be predictive by just simply looking at what has happened already. So let's look at the 8 common ones here. We got overhead power lines and the obvious hazard of electrocution. We have ground conditions and the different slopes and voids and different soft fill or drainage covers, things that are not necessarily visible to us, but need to be assessed before equipment gets put on site. Certainly other traffic that's in the work site itself, as well as traffic that may be involved while loading or unloading equipment to get it to the site. That's very important. Wind is always something that plagues us in outdoor work on MEWPs, so it's a very large factor. And simply looking at flags or taking out your phone and looking at the weather app and asking what is the wind today is not enough. So being a little more specific, equipping your operators and your team with anemometers that are functional and calibrated and that do the job of giving you specific wind readings right at the location and right at the height that you're working at. We continue on with overhead obstructions, things like steel and pipe work and duct work, whether you're indoors, even ceilings. Outdoors, of course, power lines have their own category, but they are, of course, an overhead hazard. Tree limbs are definitely a big one that are overlooked. Sometimes lamp posts. You could be doing under bridge work. I assure you that anybody who has ever been crushed in an overhead hazard obstruction incident did not plan to be crushed that day, and the hazard was clearly there above them, or next to them or below them, depending on the crushing incident. So it's just one of those things that again are assumed that it's that I know it's there, but you really do have to teach people and involve supervisors to monitor to ensure people are looking and being observationally aware of their surroundings before moving. Weather's a big one that people think they have a really good handle on, but again, with what Red was saying about how things change very dynamically on work sites, weather is one of those things, and it can change very quickly in many regions across North America. And so we have to be able to quickly adapt, quickly adjust, and when in doubt, workers need to feel empowered that they have that ability to stop the unsafe work, which sometimes can be stopping, lowering yourself, and coming down and making sure that let's verify if that is in fact lightning that's coming in the horizon, and I don't want to be up there if it does in fact come over us. So we have different seasonal issues as well. And one of the ones that are overlooked for sure is heat, right? Heat stroke or sun days, even just sunburns, things like that. Keeping people safe in hot environments, keeping people safe in cold environments, and in between. So all of those things change rapidly, and weather has to be one of the factors. And it does, and it has contributed to incidents in the past. Falling objects are something that we as operators or those folks who we train as operators need to be aware of, that it's a factor that they can control, as they may be the ones dropping these objects from their platform. We work with very many great organizations in our industry who have lots of falling object protection products that are available on the market. And so we want to be able to highlight that and make sure that everybody's aware that those exist. And unauthorized access, because nothing worse than, having a plan and having trained people, but then having the equipment left, you know, available to anybody, and keys are still in the machine and somebody can just grab it and take it for a joyride. So that's been one of the leading causes of incidents as well. In a specific kind of an example here, just to highlight what I was just talking about, just highlighting one of those hazards to recognize, and really just demonstrating the importance of safe use procedures and why it may be important to graduate from just the simple talk or the highlighting of a hazard to really drilling down and getting a procedure in place, is overhead power line work. If you look at the image, whether it's a boom or a scissor lift, yeah, it's not as simple as most people assume. Because specifically, let's look at the boom on the right side. The boom does rotate, and we have moving parts that stick out in different areas. And when the machine moves around dynamically and does change positions, what was assumed to be a safe distance at one point can change very rapidly. So taking the time to develop a on-site works task-specific procedure that highlights this and clearly demonstrates this, then having those folks trained to that, having supervisors actively involved in providing that training and documenting it all and getting some signatures. That's really what the point of this slide is just to demonstrate that sometimes you want to dive deeper into a more of a procedure rather than just saying, here is the hazard and here is the control. That's not necessarily enough sometimes. So things we can do is also provide resources to folks. There are minimum safe approach distance charts we can utilize in order to really understand what it says there. Because I know in training, I can say to people, stay away from power lines, but that's not a reality in a lot of work sites. We're going to be stuck with power lines there. We're not going to be able to de-energize them. So we are going to have a clear and direct procedure that we can train people to. We're going to look at the 5 layers of detection. These 5 layers of detection are incredibly important in terms of deploying the overall plan here. These layers do overlap, and I would say that this is really a core element of where a safety culture lives. If you want to have a safety culture, it needs a place to exist, and it should exist in this type of overlapping structure of involvement. Every layer of everybody involved in the process is engaged based on this type of a process. So real quick, workplace inspections, which is where really anybody from the team can be involved, but supervisors should be leading this charge, and it should be scheduled regularly. It should be structured and documented as well. And not only do you do it, of course, before the project, but schedule it again during the project periodically to see what's changed dynamically throughout that workplace inspection. Pre-use inspections, now we're placing that emphasis directly on the operator, and we're saying follow your training, because every training course should be talking very much detail about pre-use inspections, but not just of the equipment. Let's do a route walk. Let's walk our route. Where am I going to go today? What am I going to do? Where am I going to set up? And let's walk around and make sure that everything's safe and hasn't changed. This is not a formality. It's a very important step. And then we want daily engagement. So again, the supervisor, the manager, the user, whoever's going to lead that team, let's get them back together every single day at the start of the shift. Don't skip this important step. And say what's changed since yesterday. And could be something as very simple but overlooked as weather, right? What's the weather? Whether it's weather that's approaching, or maybe it rained all night and the entire ground conditions have changed in the site. So how dynamic are the changes that just occurred overnight, or what's predicted to be occurring throughout today, just from a weather perspective? Also, what new equipment came in today? What new trucks have moved into the yard today? How many more people are here? How many less people? What's different? So that's a really important, I would say, 5 to 10 minute kind of daily tailgate or toolbox talk every day. And this is where, as Red talked about the importance of worker involvement, this is where you really get them to talk to you. Maybe yesterday something happened and I wasn't accessible to them, and now I'm giving them that opportunity at the start of every day to really talk about yesterday's problems so we can prevent them today. Very, very important step. Supervisor monitoring is massive in all this. This is one of the things that are near and dear to my heart, and it's really about observing, correcting consistently and fairly, and coaching. Nice, consistent coaching at the end, making sure that everybody understands, having the conversation, getting that reinforcement in the moment, always as soon as possible when something is observed. get after it and talk to those people. So we really want to make sure supervisors are trained in this art to understand that they're not just this figurehead, that they're a very, very important part of this process. And we're training all this intense training that we've done could be between a 4 to 8 hour training session that day. We graduated these folks with their license and they left. Who's going to take over for that after? It could be 3 or 4 or 5 years before their next training session occurs. Where's that reinforcement? That's where the supervisor really has to understand their role, and managers and employers really need to drive that point home to supervisors. And the most important step, the absolute most important, workers. Do they know? Are they aware that they are the fastest signal to affecting change in the safety of that task or that site? They are living and breathing those tasks every day, and what hazards are occurring. Some hazards pop up and disappear on you. We need that feedback loop as fast as possible and as often as possible. But do they feel safe and empowered in order to speak up? Because there's this prevailing feeling out there that when you talk to workers, when you talk to operators, that there's a little bit of sarcasm or cynicism involved, where they don't necessarily feel that that's what the company wants. So it's on all of us to really create that environment that they feel safe. And none of this would be possible without a continuous evaluation process. So whether we're evaluating compliance, worker proficiency, the effectiveness of the controls that we implemented, what are some of the incident trends? Unfortunately, incidents do occur, and we can and we should learn from them through evaluation. But what about near misses? How do we empower people to actually speak up when something almost happened? Nobody else saw it, that they're going to come up to us and they're going to give us details on that so we can learn from it without it becoming an incident. And as Red very, very clearly touched on, lessons learned is that massive part of the feedback loop, that we get together and we actually put this down. So who's involved in that process? And it really does start at the top and work all the way down to the worker level for everybody to be involved in this process. This is all part of ANSI, and OSHA drives all these points home as well. And to close the loop, you can see how the MEWP safety cycle really works. And, the steps are numbered, but really, do they need numbers? I could start anywhere. And then as long as I understand that this is a continuous loop, it's a living process. It's always evolving. And we have to always keep evaluating every part of these steps. It doesn't really matter where we are, because overall, we got to, the message that everyone has to get is that we have to rinse and repeat. Everything that we do there, rinse and repeat. And we know some of these things. We know that training we got to repeat. Good organizations know that they can't just train their workers once. So when we get down here and when we get all the way to the improvement process, we remember, once we make improvements, we got to go back and revisit the plan. And sometimes that involves retraining, making sure that everybody's up to date, and then we can continue to do the work and again find if there's anything else that we missed. So the MEWP safety cycle is important. It really ties in well with the commitment, the resources, the accountability, the expectations. All of those things tie into the bigger picture, which is ownership. We want ownership at every level, and that all ties in with OSHA's Safe and Sound campaign and their expectations. So as Red said, ask yourself if your organization is behaving like this, and if they're not, then the people that are listening to webinars like this can be the voice, can be the beacon that can start to ask the questions or drive the change. That's it for me.
Well, thanks, Bart and Red. And having the two of them presented actually makes me think about the issue of how multiple people have different perspectives and share different insights that that add to the outcome of great planning and systems and processes. So again, as we kind of summarize now at what we're looking at, bringing this all together, OSHA gives us the pillars. ANSI A92 gives us the MEWP specific practices for each one. So when you're looking at it, management leadership, safe use plan, worker participation, qualified operators and supervisors, find and fix risk assessments, continuous improvements, evaluation of compliance, the whys and now the hows into one integrated system. So when we're putting this stuff together, it really is saying that, you need to make sure that you're not doing one thing. I remember when I first got involved on the safety side of things, and I looked at actuarials that came over and said 87% of all accidents associated with mobile elevated work platforms, MEWPs, were on the shoulders of the operator. And that's because they were the guys, the last one in the line of defense. They're the ones with their hands on the controls. They didn't select the equipment. They didn't do the risk assessment up front. They didn't provide the fall protection. They didn't ensure that the training was being done. So there's all these elements that took place before that should have been in place before we even start pointing the fingers that direction. So all of these things give us a more systemic approach to what we're doing. So we're getting ready to end this up, and we end up having some questions. And these are some questions that I pose that anybody who is involved with planning in coming up with programs should be thinking about these on an ongoing basis. What has been your biggest challenge in implementing a safe use plan? How do you measure worker participation? How often do you revisit your risk assessments? And what improvements are most important within your organization? So if you're looking at these questions that they're posing here that can be part of discussion as we close, these are questions that really should be in place on an ongoing basis with all of our planning. So when we're looking at, again, the key takeaways of safe and sound, this ongoing development of programs, how we get things done, we have management owns the process, workers own participation, risk assessments drive safe decisions, training builds competency, doesn't make you competent, but they build on it, enables you to become competent, and evaluation sustain ongoing improvement. So as we're looking at all of these things that we need to be doing to build our systemic approach to safe use in all the things that we're doing, a well-developed safe use plan brings management leadership, worker participation, and hazard identification together into a practical process that protects workers every day. So it's not this one-time event. It's not creating this book that sits on a shelf. It really is a live document that needs to be put out and worked on an ongoing basis. One of the tools that we offer specific is the ANSI A92 safe use standard requires that all users, employers of anybody who's using the equipment must create a MEWP specific safe use guide program. And within that, we end up having this document that you can see that we have a link to. You can take this and develop your own program. And we give a step-by-step guidance on every component that's part of that safe use program. And we give you tools that will help you in each one of those, areas to assist you. So there's lots of information that's out in the marketplace today that really can assist you. So now we're to the end of our program. We have a few minutes left to open it up for Q&As that you can put into the Q&A box that's out there. Where do we go next? I say visit the OSHA OSHA.gov worksite and look at the safe use campaign. There's lots of tools that are there. The ANSI A92.22 safe use standard. You could go to SAIA who are the secretary to that. You could buy a manual of responsibility for both the A92.22 and 24, which is combined. A manual of responsibility gives you an exact copy of the safe use and training standard for $8 plus shipping. So that's a tool that's out there. You can go to IPAF's website, www.ipaf.org, and we have an immense amount of tools that are out there, from toolbox talk, guidance documents, incident data that you can utilize within your planning. Make sure that you get compliant training. There's lots of good compliant training that's out in the marketplace. One of the things that's out there today is MEWP supervisor training. And while people are looking at the MEWP operator, here's another way. And then we have all these technical guidance. So we do encourage you to move forward with it. And last but not least, my commercial is that we are going to have a Work at Height conference and awards October 28th, 29th in Orlando, Florida. I encourage you all to go there. We have a great lineup of speakers that day. Great opportunity to network and see some sponsors and people are bringing some products in that you may not be aware of. So we'll go back to any Q&A and let's see. I don't have the Q&A box up here. We have a question. Are fall protection restraint systems required when operating a MEWP 3B? So who would like to field that?
Happy to take it.
Are fall protection restraint systems required when operating a MEWP 3B?
Yeah, so specifically as a requirement, no, a restraint system is not required. In fact, the work that can be done with a 3B type MEWP, which is a boom that's mobile while elevated, can involve many different hazards based on the specific movement, never mind the specific task. Because of the dynamics involved, you have to be able to work in different configurations. So limiting it to just a restraint system wouldn't necessarily work. So what most manufacturers do is provide anchorage that is available for both restraint and arrest. And then based on risk assessment, this is where we would tie in a safe work procedure and train our workers to say, when driving to and from the task location, let's stay in a restraint application. And then when setting up and going up and doing the work, we can now be in a fall arrest application. And so there are these different products on the market. We have the availability of the anchorage to be dynamic in both configurations. And all that's missing is that very important step at the user level, at the supervisor level, to create those procedures and train their workers on the task specific hazards and how to adjust our fall protection system based on the different limitations.
Brad, do you have anything you want to add?
I would just like to add that fall protection is required, but the specific question of restraint or arrest, that's where it gets into, as Bart stated, the supervisor company policy fall protection plan in the task that's being done. So a 3B must have fall protection other than the guardrail, personal fall protection, but Bart is correct. Restraint, not specific at all times.
And I'll follow up with IPAF's recommendation for it is that you should always be in restraint when possible and only moving into a full arrest system when the work requires it. So dominantly, I would say that, the ability to be restrained and prevent someone from falling out of the system is your best approach for safety, and only using full arrest when it's required within the confines of that work platform and the work that needs to be complete.
Very well said. I agree.
I'm not sure. I don't see the Q&A tab on mine. So anyone
There
else
are no
see?
open questions.
No,
Okay.
that was the only one.
All right. One last chance. Anybody else, you can put it in either the Q&A tab or in the chat box. Any questions? Hearing none, I will conclude by saying thank you. Well, we appreciate everyone's joining us today. We hope that it provided you some value. I provide my email address if there's any questions that could come up in the future that you would like us to address on the presentation. This is a recorded session, so that anybody who registered for it will get a link to our YouTube posting for this webinar, and you can share it with other people's. So thank you all for your attention. My great appreciation to Bart and Red for their contribution in today's presentation. Thank you greatly. Wonderful presentations, both of you. And that concludes our session. Thank you.
Thank you all. Be safe.
Thank you.